The Cleveland Browns situation has officially entered a phase where I genuinely don't know whether to laugh or just stare at the wall and process it all quietly. We are 3 days into a minicamp. No pads, just helmets, essentially organized throwing sessions, and somehow we've arrived at a place where both Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel are reportedly on the trading block. Anthony Richardson's name is being floated as a target, and local media is out here suggesting that Shedeur doesn't even deserve to be the backup quarterback on this roster. 3 days, no contact, no preseason games, no training camp. 3 days of voluntary throwing sessions, and the narrative machine in Cleveland has already run the full cycle from competition to chaos. Let me walk you through what's actually happening, what the media is doing, and why none of this reflects the real situation developing inside that building. Let me start with the media narrative, because it's important to trace exactly how this thing has evolved over the past year and a half, because the evolution itself tells you something important about the quality of the analysis being produced around Shedeur Sanders. Go back to when he was in the draft process. The argument was that he didn't play well enough. Then when that didn't stick because the tape was there for anyone to examine honestly, the argument shifted to the interviews, that teams had concerns coming out of the private sessions at the Combine. Then a full year passed. Shedeur entered the Cleveland building, operated in an environment that was demonstrably not set up for his success, survived it with his character and reputation entirely intact, and now we're sitting here and not a single member of the Cleveland media, including the ones who most visibly do not have his best interests at heart, the ones who actively covered him unfavorably all last season, has produced a single credible character concern. Not one. After a year of proximity to beat reporters who, by their own behavioral pattern, would clearly benefit professionally from finding something negative to attach to his name, they came up empty, because there's nothing there. So what's left? What's the remaining argument against Shedeur Sanders getting a real fair opportunity to compete for and win this starting job? His last name. That's genuinely where we've landed. A year ago, the argument was that the only reason he got drafted was because of his last name. Now the argument is that the only reason he fell in the draft was because of everything surrounding his last name. Both of those things cannot be true simultaneously. The narrative shifted to fit whatever conclusion people wanted to reach at whatever moment they were making it, and that kind of reasoning, conclusion first, justification arranged around it second, is exactly what produces the coverage environment that Todd Monken correctly recognized as corrosive to developing a young quarterback and shut out of his facility. The argument that Shedeur doesn't deserve to be the backup is not a football argument. It is a continuation of a pattern that has been operating since before he took a snap in the NFL. Let me talk about Dillon Gabriel for a moment, because I want to approach this with more fairness than most of this conversation typically generates. Gabriel is a third-round draft pick. That means he carries real draft capital cost. He's not a street free agent who costs the organization nothing to carry on the roster. General Manager Andrew Berry has historically been someone who works to extract maximum value from every organizational asset, and a third-round pick represents a significant enough investment that simply releasing Gabriel without getting anything back doesn't align with how this front office has typically operated. So when Ashley Bostock reports that the Browns are still interested in seeing what Gabriel can develop into and evaluating his role within this roster, that's not a defense of Gabriel as a player. That's an accurate description of how a competent front office manages a roster asset they've invested meaningful capital in. The question of whether Gabriel ultimately stays, gets traded, or ends up on a practice squad somewhere is genuinely open. And pretending it's already completely resolved before training camp begins is the same kind of premature conclusion that has characterized the coverage of this entire situation. What is not genuinely open is the assessment from people who have actually watched both quarterbacks compete. Josh Cribbs, a man who played professional football at a high level, who understands what winning looks like from inside a competitive environment, who has no particular reason to advocate for either player over the other, was direct about it. Gabriel has expended his opportunity with the Browns. He's not the talent the situation requires. Shedeur outplayed him. That's a football person speaking honestly about what he observed, not someone working from a media narrative. And Kordell Stewart, a quarterback who played this game at the highest level, who broke records at the position, who understands what the role requires, said it even more simply. Gabriel doesn't belong there. Shedeur outplayed him. Winning is everything, and Shedeur has done it. When legitimate football people who don't have a stake in the media cycle around this story speak plainly about what they saw, they all arrive at the same place. The only people still manufacturing reasons to keep the competition artificially open are the ones whose interests are served by doing so. Now, I want to address the Anthony Richardson trade speculation specifically, because this is where the conversation moved into territory that I think requires an honest reality check. The proposal being floated in certain corners of this discussion is that the Browns should trade Shedeur Sanders and a late-round pick to Indianapolis for Anthony Richardson. I want to think through what that Browns quarterback room would then look like, because I think when you actually examine it clearly, the proposal becomes very difficult to defend on pure football grounds. You would have Deshaun Watson, whose physical situation involves genuine uncertainty about how many games he can sustain as a primary starter across a full season. You would have Dillon Gabriel, who is widely acknowledged as a developmental project still very early in his professional formation. You would have Anthony Richardson, who despite his remarkable physical tools, has struggled with consistency, has dealt with injury interruptions, and has a documented pattern of situations where his relationship with the competitive moment has raised legitimate questions from evaluators. That is the quarterback room someone is advocating for. That is what they're trading Shedeur, a 5th overall pick who has demonstrated real competitive character and genuine football intelligence, to obtain. The Richardson conversation also reveals something interesting about the motivations driving certain segments of this media coverage. Richardson brings the kind of physical spectacle that generates content. His arm is a legitimate weapon. His athleticism is real and dramatic. And in a media environment where the evaluation of quarterbacks is sometimes conducted more for audience engagement than for actual football understanding, Richardson's highlight ceiling generates excitement in ways that Shedeur's more systematic, timing-based operational style doesn't generate the same kind of immediate reaction. But we are not evaluating these quarterbacks for their ability to generate exciting content. We are theoretically evaluating them for their ability to help a franchise win football games consistently over time. And when you examine that question honestly, without the filter of which player produces more engaging highlights, the answer is not obviously Richardson. The Steelers' trade rumor involving Shedeur is the other significant development worth addressing directly. Pittsburgh reportedly has Aaron Rodgers returning to the roster, which creates a specific situational dynamic where Shedeur would theoretically be available to develop behind an experienced veteran in a structured environment with lower immediate performance pressure. The theoretical appeal of that situation is understandable. But Pittsburgh also has Drew Aller and Will Howard on their roster, 2 quarterbacks their own fan base has genuine investment in developing. The idea that Shedeur goes to Pittsburgh and sits comfortably behind Rodgers while 3 other quarterbacks compete for relevance on the same roster is a more complicated picture than the simple, "he'll develop quietly" framing suggests. And more fundamentally, Shedeur Sanders was drafted 5th overall by the Cleveland Browns. The organizational capital invested in that selection is not something you casually dissolve through a trade motivated more by media fatigue with the narrative than by any genuine football evaluation of what he's capable of doing for this franchise. The Michael Penix situation adds another layer of genuine complexity to the Browns' roster management picture. Reports indicate Penix is unlikely to be ready for training camp and may not be available until around week 3 of the preseason. That creates a real and practical need for quarterback bodies in the building during the early stages of camp, regardless of what the ultimate depth chart resolution looks like, which means Gabriel potentially staying on the roster initially as a practice camp body serves a genuine operational function independent of any longer-term evaluation of his role. This is the kind of nuance that gets completely flattened in a media environment operating at the speed and volume the Cleveland coverage has been running at. The same reporter being cited as evidence that Gabriel is going to the Atlanta Falcons could also be accurately cited as evidence that the Browns still want to evaluate what Gabriel offers developmentally. Both of those things can be true simultaneously within a front office that is managing multiple variables across a compressed timeline. What I find genuinely telling in all of this noise is how the conversation around wide receiver additions has unfolded in the same media circles currently manufacturing reasons to question Shedeur's roster standing. These same discussions about needing a veteran wide receiver presence, about bringing in someone with experience who can help the quarterbacks and the younger receivers develop their professional instincts, this conversation is happening completely independently of any examination of Jerry Jeudy's performance last season. Jeudy, who is already on this roster, was statistically among the worst in the league in drops last year. He was a veteran wide receiver presence who emphatically did not deliver the stabilizing influence a veteran is supposed to provide. The same people who want to import veteran presence at the receiver position have somehow managed to conduct that entire conversation without acknowledging that the veteran receiver already in the building is a significant part of the problem being described. That selective attention, noticing the need for veteran receiver help while ignoring that the veteran receiver already there is part of why the group underperformed, is exactly the same selective attention that has characterized the coverage of Shedeur's situation since the beginning. The broader competitive picture in that quarterback room is worth stepping back and examining honestly, because I think the noise of the trade rumors and the media narratives has obscured something important about what the actual football situation looks like heading into training camp. Shedeur Sanders has demonstrated, in the limited and structurally disadvantaged circumstances he's been given, that he belongs in this competition and that the coaching staff currently in place believes he belongs in it. Watson is operating with physical uncertainty that any honest projection has to account for. Gabriel has been evaluated by multiple credible football people who watched him compete directly against Shedeur and reached the same conclusion independently of each other. The organizational infrastructure, the offensive line investments, the receiver acquisitions, the philosophical framework Todd Monken has articulated publicly about what winning requires. All of it points toward a specific kind of quarterback at the center of this system. And that quarterback is the one whose name keeps appearing in trade rumors, not because the football evidence suggests he should be traded, but because certain people in this conversation would find it more convenient if he weren't there to complicate the narrative they've been building. Here's what I actually believe happens when training camp opens and the evaluation takes place under real conditions, without the manufactured urgency of a minicamp narrative cycle distorting everything. Shedeur competes with the same daily consistency and preparation quality that the coaches inside that facility have already observed. The offensive system Monken is building operates on timing, rhythm, and the quick processing and decisive delivery that Shedeur's game is specifically built around. The preseason games provide actual competitive evidence that the throwing sessions in shorts and helmets cannot provide, and that evidence gets incorporated into an evaluation being conducted by a coaching staff that arrived in Cleveland with zero organizational loyalty to any previous hierarchy and zero motivation to protect anyone from what the film honestly shows. That process has a direction. It has had a direction for weeks. The formal resolution of it is the only thing still pending, and no amount of trade speculation generated between now and training camp changes what happens when the actual evaluation resumes under real conditions. What's happened in Cleveland over the past 3 days of minicamp coverage is a perfect illustration of why Todd Monken closed the facility doors in the first place. The competitive evidence was limited and preliminary. 3 days of no-contact throwing sessions that no serious football evaluator would treat as a meaningful sample for franchise-level decisions. The media coverage responded to that limited evidence by generating an entire trade market speculation cycle, questioning the roster standing of a 5th overall pick, manufacturing arguments about backup quarterback worthiness from people who spent an entire season demonstrating their approach to covering this particular quarterback. The instinct to run the full narrative cycle before a single padded practice has been held is not journalism. It is content generation operating in the space where patient, honest observation should be. And the people inside that building, doing the actual evaluation under actual conditions, are not running on the same timeline. They have seen enough to know what they have. The rest of this process is about confirming it under conditions that can't be reasonably disputed when the announcement finally comes.